Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Mein Name ist
Hello and welcome. My name is Sabine Odiambo. I'm the Deputy General Secretary of German Africa Foundation, and I'll be your host this afternoon. To begin with some housekeeping remarks, we have an English and a German live stream. Under the window, you can click English or German, the language.
In case you are still on the German live stream, you can change the language by clicking the button below the live stream window to English. Auch direkt ein paar Hinweise.
Some remarks on the opportunity of asking questions after the moderated discussion. Feel free to type your question into the chat right of the in the live stream. Alternatively, make use of the link under the chat to activate your own mic and camera to ask your question directly. I'd like to hand over to Ottmar von Holtz now, Deputy in the German Parliament and of the parliamentary group of Bündnis 90, the Green Party. Mr. von Holtz, over to you. Thank you very much, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to welcome you to this online discussion today and thank the German Africa Foundation for organizing this event on the future of investment promotion for African companies and the role of promoting employment-intensive foreign direct investment in development cooperation. In times when exchanges are still limited due to the pandemic, the German Africa Foundation brings together people from practice and politics from Germany and African countries today with experts from Ghana and Tanzania, as well as the African diaspora as a link with an exciting panel. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health crisis. It affects all areas of our social interaction. It is a polypandemic that has exposed the weaknesses of our coexistence worldwide. Despite all the good and necessary measures to combat the acute health pandemic, don't get me wrong, there is still a lot to be done here, especially in terms of global solidarity. We must not lose sight of the other areas. Autocratic regimes must not use the pandemic to their advantage, and fundamental rights and freedoms must be returned. Journalists, opposition activists, and human rights defenders must not become victims of this pandemic as well. Another area is global education. UNICEF warns that for more than 168 million children, schools have been completely closed for almost a year, and that up to 24 million students will never attend school again. Also, 39 billion school meals have been eliminated in 2020, and that's on top of a simultaneous increase in people living in extreme poverty, an increase to 124 million according to World Bank figures. Looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda, the pandemic has a direct or indirect negative impact on each individual goal. The pandemic is exacerbating inequality everywhere it existed before, though of course not all countries worldwide are equally affected and face a wide variety of challenges. Nevertheless, I also see an opportunity here because the Agenda 2030 is an international agreement that contains common goals. It is up to us to work together on solutions that create more sustainable and resilient living realities. In the spirit of building back better, we need solutions and approaches based on and aimed at sustainability, climate protection, and social justice. The immense investments needed for such a global project for the future can only be raised in conjunction with entrepreneurial commitment, including through private investment. Even before the pandemic, foreign direct investment played an important role, and its importance for a successful global socio-ecological transformation is now even greater. That is why now is precisely the time to think about the design of these investments, its contents, and to implement projects that do not play the economy, social justice, and ecology off against each other, but think together. Fair wages, environmental sustainability, and the inclusion of civilians in project planning and implementation phases must become the new standard. In the future, cooperation with German companies should become even more of a guarantee for the protection of environmental and human rights and the development of sustainable employment opportunities and value creation processes on site. Today, we want to address the questions of how investment promotion in African companies can be designed to be socially just, sustainable, and ecological in the future. What opportunities and challenges lie in practice, and what political framework conditions are needed to achieve our common goals? I now look forward to the exciting contributions and the following discussion. I express my thanks for organizing this and hand over to Mrs. Odiambo. Thank you very much, Mr. von Holtz, for the welcome address. You mentioned the questions we wanted to deal with today. To begin with, let's have a look at where is the German social development cooperation standing with a view on Africa, and who is better prepared than Dr. Stefan Oswald, who has been the head of the Marshall Plan with Africa Department, Flight and Migration, and the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development since May 2018. He has been working in development cooperation for 30 years and has held various national and international positions. Mr. Oswald, Mr. von Holtz mentioned it, raising private money to reach development goals has been a focus of the German Africa policy for many years, especially in the context mentioned Marshall Plan in regard of investment promotion.
Für die Förderung deutscher und europäischer Unternehmen mit Projekten in Afrika.
And the Development Investment Fund, 400 million euros were originally earmarked to support German and European companies with projects in Africa, and another 400 million euros to support African companies. How is this being implemented? And above all, how do you ensure that the projects are designed to be socially and ecologically sustainable? Dear Mrs. Odiambo, thank you very much. And yes, when I took over, or let me say at the beginning of my professional career, I was linked with Africa from the very beginning in the beautiful country of LC Cancer. I worked for the revolutionary government of Zanzibar in the field of agriculture, and therefore the new president is known to me, especially because her husband had been the seed farm manager in that farm. So the colleagues from Ghana should know that I'm also very familiar with her country. I have been visiting several times. I've been the special envoy for the reform partnership with Ghana, which is also an important element of the Marshall Plan of Africa and the compact with Africa, and therefore a practical contribution. Mrs. Odiambo, you mentioned, of course, the Development Investment Fund, which is a partial element, and where the point is to use and create two essential columns in this 1 billion all in all, which we provide. It consists of 3 columns. One is the Africa Connect. This is a fund which should enable
europäischen und deutschen Mittelständler auf dem Weg
to prepare German and European mid-sized companies on their way to Africa. There is the Africa Go, where the target group are African companies mainly, which in their own context would like to expand. And of course, the so-called economic network, where the point is the cooperation with the federal ministry, where the target is matchmaking between European and African companies. You raised the question of ecological sustainability. This is one of our core goals in German development policy. Our implementation organization, those who are implementing this, are in charge of monitoring the financing for these measures in line with social and economic sustainability criteria. In practice, how does it look like? In Africa Connect, we've so far acted as follows. Loans of up to 750,000 to 4 million can be made available until March 21. We handed out 53 million to 21 companies in 12 countries. And this created not 9,000 jobs. And from my point of view, in times of the pandemic, quite a success. When due to Corona, the pandemic, liquidity problems occurred, the Africa COVID response helped, for instance, in Ghana, the chocolate fabric fair trade Verpflicht, which could be helped to overcome their liquidity problems. In Africa Go, until 2030, about 25,000 jobs shall be created. All in all, 600 million euros are planned for this purpose. And at the same time, Africa Grow is supporting the African startup Aerobics. They are developing a technology to analyze air photos, and the results can be communicated to the farmers. So far, what I wanted to say to begin with, and I think especially during the Corona pandemic, the Development Investment Fund is more important than ever. And I think it led to a situation that we have quite a flow at the moment, and that especially in contexts where the economic environment could be improved for our partners, and that everything is running well. Thank you very much so far on this one. Thank you very much, Mr. Oswald, for this first overview. Let's go a bit more into detail in regard of inclusivity and ecological sustainability and what the challenges are here. I'm glad to welcome Dr. Sabine Müller. She has been the Director General of the Africa Department at Deutsche Gesellschaft für Internationale Zusammenarbeit since August 2017. The Doctor of Agricultural Economics initially worked for a consulting firm that carried out studies for GIZ, the World Bank, and other development policy institutions. Mrs. Müller, as GIZ, you are involved in the implementation of the plans for investment promotions. Where do you see the biggest challenges when it comes to inclusive and environmentally sustainable investments? What do you think about especially direct investments from abroad?
Ja, ich glaube, da kann ich gut anknüpfen, auch an dem, was Herr Oswald ja
I
ausgeführt
think
hat.
I can add on what Mr. Oswald said. We implement the projects from our ministry and have to keep certain standards. And Mr. von Holtz said it, Africa needs capital and you cannot avoid getting it from the private sector. But we are not automatically inclusive or green. The share of Germany in foreign direct investment in Africa is far behind that of other countries. However, we have to say that a larger share of the investments of other countries goes to the extractive sector or into fossil fuels, whereas German direct investments go into processing and services, and that has a higher potential to provide jobs. And this means we have a good starting point. It's rather a question of quantity. But as far as quality is concerned, I believe that we are not that bad. And we continue from a certain point. We have a special initiative, training and jobs within the framework of implementing the Marshall Plan. And this centers or focuses on promoting investments in a way that they are inclusive and sustainable. And this happens in 8 countries, which is just an example. And this works through cooperation of companies, that is targeted support for investments, because these are investments where certain standards are kept to or adhered to, social standards like working conditions according to ILO standards, minimum wages. And this is a challenge, and of course, social networks. And this is part of creating good jobs, not just jobs, but good jobs. And this includes social security. And if this is not yet available on site, and this is one of the challenges we face. Another one is environmental standards. That is where we work well, and we support certain companies that reach certain standards, and we need support from local companies and resources. And these are the challenges that we face. Other challenges are workers that we need to train. And this one topic, how much local contact do we have, after all, to the final product? Because we often face the case that something is produced, but a larger share of what is put in there is exported. That is, value added is relatively small. I saw it in the textile industry, for instance. We do have an industrial center in Ethiopia. They import cloth and stitch on buttons, etc., and then it's exported again. If we manage to create a local supply industry that can produce some of the pre-products locally, then you create more jobs and you have more chances within this value added chain to adhere to ecological standards. These are areas where we have a lot of cooperation.
Ja, herzlichen Dank
Thank you very much for these different challenges that we are going to have a closer look at later. Let's have another look at what works well. And for this purpose, we invited Elsie Kanza. She is the Tanzanian economist and member of the executive committee of the World Economic Forum and the special advisor to the WEF president as head of the WEF's regional agenda of Africa. She has led numerous public-private partnership initiative solutions in 2011. And Ms. Kanzer, maybe you have substantial experience that you would like to share. What are the 2 or 3 most successful measures that ensure private investment goes along with sustainable growth? And what conclusions can you draw from that for the promotion of FDI, FID in the context of development cooperation in Africa?
Thank you very much, Sabine. As you mentioned, I've been involved with public-private collaboration initiatives with the World Economic Forum directly as head of Africa since 2011. But before that, since 2006, supporting was focal point for Tanzania. So a very practical external perspective. And because of this particular focus on public-private collaboration, it's really focusing, coming up with new solutions to complex systemic problems that cannot be solved by the private sector or the public sector alone. So that's an important aspect to take into account. And in this respect, I've really found that there are 3 critical principles for success. One is that there needs to be an alignment of interests related to addressing a transformation challenge, not a transactional agenda. And this is important because true transformation in terms of development takes time. It's a long-term and strategic view and not one that is focused on quarterly reporting of profits. The second is that it is important to foster trust-based relationships between the public and private sector to arrive at a common purpose. And this is why it's necessary to have a series of dialogue between the parties. There's no natural fit because each party has its interests, each party has its constraints, and finding a common ground takes some effort to ensure that everyone also adheres to principles of good governance in their respective corners. And third, it is best if both parties co-curate the innovation process of coming up with new solutions. And the importance of this is that there's a shared ownership of both success and failure, which makes for a real partnership. In this regard, I'd like to share 2 examples, both related to sustainable development goals, where we've seen this bear results in practice. One is efforts to address the food security agenda by the World Economic Forum New Vision for Agriculture that was launched in 2009, which resulted in the launch of a Grow Africa collaboration with the African Union and NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa's Development, as well as 7 countries. And its real ambition was to see how to improve the space to crowd in private sector investment in agriculture in a way that drives job creation and increases rural incomes. By 2015, $2.3 billion of investments had been actually committed and implemented. And this investment provided 10 million smallholder farmers with services and contracts. Another concrete example under this broad umbrella was that Royal DSM, in collaboration with the government of Rwanda and the World Food Programme, launched a new state-of-the-art factory in Kigali, very much focused on fortified foods. It was the first of its kind in the world. And based on that success story, went on to develop a similar plant in Asia. So this is just one concrete example of how through this special collaboration, you're able to address a critical need and at the same time provide a commercially viable space for investment.
Ja, herzlichen Dank dafür. Schauen wir uns nun die einzelnen Themen ökologische.
Thank you very much for this. Let's have a look at individual topics that we are going to talk about. And let's start with the latter. I would like to turn to Kizito Diambo. He is the founder and CEO of Agribora GmbH, an agricultural technology platform in Kenya with over 36,000 smallholder farmers that helps reduce the risk of smallholder farming systems. Before he founded Agribora, he was the CEO of Keto Solutions, a contract farming company that worked with small-scale farmers in Western Kenya to produce value-added products in rural markets. And he is also a speaker for global learning and is committed to a differentiated image of Africa and Germany. And because I was asked, he is not related to me, or I am not to him. Mr. Odhiambo, let's now take a closer look at the topics. In 2018, you founded Agrivora, a German-based company that provides digital solutions for smallholder farmers in Kenya. What are the biggest challenges with regard to local value creation? How has COVID-19 impacted them? Where do you see the greatest potential here for DC to provide support in the context of investment promotion? I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Greetings from Kenya. Let me give you some context. In the years 2015 to 18, I created a local value-added chain for soybeans, which promoted 1,000 smallholder farmers and put them in a position to produce soybeans, and we continued, or those were processed for drinks, beverages, and meal. And through the activities, I realized that where the challenges are and where they are for a local value-added chain. And here I am not talking about large value-added stakeholders that are able to process tons of products. That means we just wanted to find out whether it's possible to include smallholder farmers in local value-added chains. And the result was that we had to understand the complexity of the topic because we had quite a low productivity in Kenya. And overall in Africa, on the one hand, because we do have little fertilizers, and on the other hand, there are traditional growing methods that people cling to. And the topic of climate change is also there. That means productivity is a big topic that makes it difficult for local value added because we do not have the raw materials locally. And the most raw materials need to be imported from other parts of the country, and that means that is a problem for these farmers who grew a product, a certain product, and COVID-19 showed us that there are not only health damages, but also, as we can see in agriculture, that it's a problem of food security. And we had a survey with the European Commission among 1,500 smallholder farmers to find out what is the situation that they are in. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the topic was job loss, food security. But on the other hand, after several months or a year now, we can see that food security is recognized to be a big problem. And I believe that when you have a look at all the potentials in investment promotion, I think that the largest potential can be seen first in the African youth. We do have a young democracy and population, which is a chance to think things anew and react to the situation. On the other hand, we do have the topic of diaspora. We're talking about wired money from the diasporic community, which provides a large share. And this is also a chance to try to find out how these can be used for the development of the country, and to turn it into or include it into local value added, because money is missing there for the smallholder farmers. And I think this is a chance that we have in the development cooperation, that this cooperation is not only happening locally, but also by including the diaspora in other countries, like in Germany, for instance, which could also support this.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ja, spannende Information in der Tat, dass die Rücküberweisung trotz Pandemie noch.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Exciting information that the money returns even grew, especially from Kenya. Let's have a look at Ghana now. Regina Honu. Regina Honu is the CEO of Soronko Academy, a leading center for technology, coding, and digital skills development in Africa that equips young people, and especially women, with the necessary technical and personal skills to receive and fulfill decent jobs. Bridging the gender gap in the IT sector. Honu has already received several national and international awards for her social entrepreneurial commitment. The Ghanaian Ministry of Education lists her among the top 50 CEOs in the country. Mrs. Honu, you are the CEO of what we would call a successful African Mittelstand company that focuses on here in Germany, we often hear that companies are hesitating to invest in Africa because of the high risk. At the same time, studies such as Winconsult and so on have shown that FDI is unsuccessful if not locally embedded, which in turn requires the necessary business infrastructure. How, from your point of view, how can development cooperation and successfully promote FDI and improve local business promotion? Which role does the African middle class play in this? And in how far has COVID-19 affected this role in the long way?
Okay. Thank you, Sabine, for the question and the opportunity to join the panel with my insight. So first of all, I wanted to say that I definitely agree that for FDI to be sustainable and to work, it requires being embedded, in local businesses, and it requires understanding of the different nuances of how local businesses run. What I find is missing is that match between, investors and great organizations. So how do we make sure that we're positioning organizations in Africa to be able to be ready to receive foreign direct investment, and how do we mitigate risk for the investors? So now, if you look on the continent and you look at things that are happening, we are seeing more sort of we have AFTA, the African Free Trade Continental Agreement, which is creating this single market within the continent. In my country, Ghana, for example, we're seeing a lot of infrastructure being done by the government and a lot of initiatives to attract foreign investment. So we have the likes of Twitter setting up a headquarters in Ghana. We have Nissan and Volkswagen setting up a manufacturing. We also have a lot of investment coming in fintech, which is the financial tech space. So you can see that there's a lot of promise and potential. From my perspective, like I said, it's creating that match between amazing local organizations that have potential, that have been groomed, to be able to take their businesses to the next level, and then investors who are looking to come to the continent, but may not fully understand, how to navigate in the space. What I think is also another enabler is technology and digitalization, right? So if you look within my field, we do a lot of digital initiatives, and you can see that digitalization can bridge that gap in ensuring that, you know, it serves as a bridge between investors and businesses, but also allowing businesses to operate, you know, in a more seamless and efficient way. When you look at the impact of COVID-19, it really had an effect on how businesses operate, and, you know, their customer base. But what's interesting is you saw a lot of businesses pivoting and being more innovative in their approach. So for me, I see COVID-19 helping to accelerate the conversation about how do you take your business to a global market? How do you put in practices so that you are more resilient and tech enabled? And how do you ensure that, you know, you can attract opportunities everywhere, no matter where you are? So now we're having this conversation virtually across the world. So I see COVID-19 as really pushing the agenda of more digital initiatives to direct more FDI onto the continent.
Ja, vielen Dank. Also Covid-19 ein bisschen als Chance.
Thank you very much. Okay, using COVID-19 a little bit as a chance. And this is where the development cooperation would like to start from when it comes to the match between foreign investors and the local companies. Let's now come to ecological sustainability, a bit more in detail. Mrs. Müller, you mentioned the challenges that arise in the context of investment promotion with regard to environmental sustainability. Perhaps we'll list a few. COVID-19 has made the conditions even more difficult. How does DC need to position itself here so that these challenges are addressed and we can talk about a successful green transformation? Against the backdrop of the severe economic consequences of COVID-19, which have set back African labor markets, in some cases severely. Is there perhaps more of a risk that ecological aspects, and how can COVID be turned into an opportunity here? Thank you very much. This is quite a complex question you asked. At the beginning of the pandemic, the point was to react quickly. I think the GIZ reacted quickly from all the actors, and they were changing measures. And the point was that running projects were adapted in a way that they, for instance, supported the production for goods that are relevant for the pandemic. That was the special initiative jobs, and that the running operation could be ensured to mediate the effect. Nevertheless, the challenges exist, and foreign investment went down by 25% considerably and are recovering slowly. And the question is, where do they go, these investments, and what could we do to make them inclusive and ecologically sustainable? And I fully agree with what Regina Honu said. She mentioned a couple of things. It must be beneficial for the investor, for the country, for everybody involved. That means the framework conditions must be created in a way that makes it interesting to invest this way in sectors which are important in the field of early transformation, energy sector, transport, agriculture. These are enormous, very important sectors to make framework conditions attractive. And the question is, and Mrs. Honu also mentioned it, what's important is the information deficit that exists. Who knows what is valid at the moment, what expertise is required. Digitization can be a game changer, yes, very true. And digitization, I think, made an enormous step forward thanks to COVID-19. We saw this in Germany, and we see it in Africa. And this is a big chance again, that also through digitization, which is not necessarily green, but of course you can do something for it by information systems by techniques which promote a climate resilient agriculture and so on, so that investment focuses more and more on green investment. And of course, our task is always capacity development and social standards, and this remains relevant.
Ja, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very
At
much.
this point, unfortunately, I have to apologize. We have a problem with the English live stream, so we are very sorry for that. We are still trying to sort it out, but also this event is being recorded and it will be put online tomorrow. So sorry for that, but we're working on it. So, machen wir weiter genau an dem Punkt.
Okay, let's continue. Capital flows towards green investment. Mr. Quisito, you just mentioned in agriculture where you are working, which is particularly affected by the consequences of climate change, especially in the field of food security and in view of the decreasing agricultural results. The point is to also invest urgently in this field. Starting from what Mrs. Müller said, which solutions do you see for a green and attractive recovery? I think I'd like to answer this in two ways. First of all, the question is to encourage German investors to have the courage of investing in Africa. Because Regina said, digitization holds a lot of chances and opportunities for us in Africa. Not just digitalization, but when you look at the variety of the universities of the continent, you find very interesting points which would be worthwhile investing. And we at Agrimbora, we are a German company, and we're also active in Kenya and the east of Africa. But we also saw that climate change, for instance, or in innovation and entrepreneurship, these issues are strengthened by thinking and defining innovation differently. And we see innovation on the one hand as technical innovation. That means there are lots of existing technical solutions which could be implemented in various countries to solve specific problems. And only this way, both parts can benefit. If a problem can be solved in a sustainable way, this is not the problem. On the other hand, technical innovations that are existing, and I think there are lots of opportunities of development cooperation, that they could be linked with concept innovation. And I think this is one of our strengths. So the point is to see which process innovation exists in Africa, in various countries, which local innovation for processes exists before we try to reinvent the wheel in technical innovation. I think when we look at climate change, and especially in the agricultural sector, we see the opportunities technology provides. How can we use them better in local environments by improved technical processes and innovation? For instance, the point is that in Kenya, 90% of the smallholder activity depends on the weather. Irrigation systems, how can they be created? How can we produce electricity by means of solar energy? How can we combine this? So the technology exists, maybe not in Kenya, but when you use them for process innovation on site, that you say you manage to bring together smallholders in cooperatives to work on their fields together. Not everybody's working on a small field of half of a soccer pit, for instance, that you can create innovation and synergies that is useful for various people. Or, for instance, the effect of satellite technology to improve data analyzation, which is possible today, to analyze that smallholder fields can be photographed once in 5 days by satellites to analyze what's going on in smallholder feeds. Or you support supplier chains. I see the chances in combining these technologies on site to bring about a beneficial upward swing where investors from other countries or from Germany see that this innovation and investing in these innovations are attractive. Thank you very much for this appeal to better match local and international investments.
Das freut uns natürlich sehr, dass jetzt auch unsere englischsprachigen Zuschauer dabei sein können.
We are glad that our English-speaking audience can listen to the English translation now. Let's go on with social inclusion and inclusive growth. Mrs. Honu, let's have a look at the gender gap. Your company is focusing on equipping girls and women with IT skills in order for them to get jobs in what is considered a male domain. Which measures need to be taken by development cooperation in ensuring that both the promotion of local and of foreign direct investment achieves a more inclusive growth?
Thank you for that question. So I am on the front line of advocating for organizations, to be gender intentional and to remove the biases when it comes to investment. So we know that typically investment goes to either males within a certain demographic or race group, but what if, investors looked beyond, the typical sort of metrics that they're looking out for and see how they can support more women businesses. So we see a lot of women starting businesses, starting enterprises. Traditionally, they may not have the skill sets or the acumen to be able to properly articulate the businesses that they have. So this is where my organization comes in with the digital skills training and also preparing them to take advantage of all those different opportunities. We are seeing a lot of innovation happening with women-led businesses. And we are seeing how women-led businesses are tripling profits. We're seeing how, they are more inclusive in their approach to solving a problem. We're seeing how they are more aggressive in making sure that they really find the root cause of the problem and come up with the solution. But we're not seeing as much support for females because traditionally they don't check all the boxes that investors are looking for. So I would like, to say that development corporations should have a gender lens and be more gender intentional in terms of how they invest, but should understand that when you are looking at getting more women, you have to go at it at a different approach. So how can they be more supportive in developing, the business acumen and the skill set of women in articulating their businesses and how they drive impact? How can they ensure that, women feel it's a safe space to come in and they won't be exploited or taken advantage of? How can we create more opportunities, for women to demonstrate and thrive, and by showcasing the skill sets that they have. So we're seeing women doing a lot of amazing things in the informal space, in micro businesses. How can we get more investment so that they take their businesses to the next level? And then we will see the real transformative change, that will drive economies. I think it's about time we give more women more investment.
Herzlichen Dank. Also hier vor allen Dingen.
Thanks a lot. This is the challenge to lift up the small-scale companies women lead to the next level. Ms. Kanzer, you also published on the necessity to include women in Africa's growth to make it sustainable. Social inclusion, of course, goes beyond the gender question. In many African countries, despite fast-growing economies before the pandemic, the gap between rich and poor widened. How can this gap be successfully reduced, and how can poverty be reduced successfully with foreign direct investment?
Sabine, let me start by stressing that the business of business should be business. Investment should take place in business opportunities that generate viable returns. In other words, FDI in Africa should be commercially viable. I think this is important to underscore. And here I really want to commend the Africa Grow initiative mentioned by Dr. Oswald that is looking to invest in venture capital and SME funds in Africa, that very much supports that. Having said that, the challenge that multi-stakeholders under the World Economic Forum on Africa began to discuss much more deliberately from 2016 was how to achieve inclusive growth. This was mainly triggered by the fact that you mentioned that despite seeing top growing economies globally from the continent, the impact on poverty and inequality was limited. One reason for that was mentioned by Dr. Muller, which is that most of the FDI, the majority, has gone into the extractive industries and continues to do so. So we need to be intentional about expanding the investment agenda. And in this regard, one concern has been how to get more local SMEs involved in the investment agenda, how to integrate women and youth as well. And this all informs the reform agenda to improve the environment for doing business by making it much more attractive to investment, not just foreign investors, but also local and regional investors. Not surprisingly, as we have seen with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and the speed with which the agreements have been reached, is that increasing intra-Africa trade has also been a big part of this reform agenda. As far as poverty reduction is concerned, this is an issue that needs all hands on deck, and investors, including foreign direct investors, are only one actor in the ecosystem. Thus, alongside the inclusive and job-creating growth agenda, multi-stakeholders have also been engaged in discussions about what and how we need to do things differently to achieve the sustainable development agenda, and post the COVID-19 pandemic, also putting new emphasis on resilience. This calls for a holistic ecosystem approach that is firmly grounded in what kind of societies and countries we want to live in. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals provides us with an excellent guide as to which metrics and elements to pay attention to as we go about investing. This applies both to the private sector as well as the public sector. And this ranges from education to decent livelihoods to climate action, as well as to ensuring and upholding good governance across the board. One positive development has been seeing more corporations subscribe to the notion of stakeholder capitalism, that is paying attention to not just profits, but also to people and the planet. And here I'd also like to highlight that earlier this year, we saw members of the World Economic Forum also signing up to metrics for upholding environmental, social, and governance principles. This is a good way forward. If you can't measure it, it does not exist. And lastly, I'd just like to echo the points that were made by both Regina and Kizito, which is really that the digitalization agenda and the fourth industrial revolution are emerging as tools that can help us accelerate the development agenda. It's exciting to see that commercial investments in mobile telephony definitely stimulating the creation of new applications such as mobile money and mobile health that are really helping Africa to bridge the infrastructure gap that has hitherto made it impossible for the majority of our impoverished and rural populations to access essential services.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to point to the fact that we are soon going to start to have the chance to ask questions for the audience, and that's why you may start asking your questions in the chat, or when you would like to join live, then please click to the link underneath the chat, because there you have to be checked as far as your equipment is concerned, and then please use this possibility before starting the discussion. Mr. Oswald, I'd like to get back to you. You mentioned where your ministry is in investment promotion in Africa and viewing the effects of COVID-19 pandemic that we learned about today, and towards the background of what we learned about challenges and measures. Are the measures sufficient that you had from your ministry in order to have social and ecological sustainable investments? Where do you see improvement possibilities, and how do we have to put our stand in order to tackle all those challenges? Thank you, Ms. Odiambo. Of course, we are able to do more with additional resources, but Ms. Müller mentioned clearly 3 billion additional euros of funds that we provided last year and this year to overcome the COVID pandemic. That is a lot that we do in the area of cushioning pandemic effects. Apart from certain regions like Southern Africa and Northern Africa, the African continent does not that strongly suffer from a medical perspective under COVID-19, but from the very first second, the economic and social effects were massive ones, and that's why the job number declined in the region by 8.5%, and more than 32 million people are affected by extreme poverty due to the pandemic. But you also have to take into account before or previously the most of the strongly growing countries on Earth were on the African continent, and we do see good chances to follow up with this. Ms. Müller pointed to the fact that most of the non-German investors work in the extractive industries, and extractive areas are areas that depend largely on the world economic situation. And the interest needs to be, when it comes to increased resilience, that local value added by processing products need to focus on own consumption. And because we had a quick development of the African free trade area, this is a chance to promote all these things. And the BMZ supports, in this year only, the construction of the African free trade area by an additional 50 million euros. I think that all in all, investments from foreign countries could lead to more sustainability. One example is the automotive industry in Tunisia, for instance, where we do have some examples of that. And I'd like to point to the fact that all those topics that we are currently discussing were part of the Africa summit this morning, where the Senegalese president spoke and our federal president. And maybe also, as Mr. Quisito said, diaspora is a very important point. There is value added and wired money from members of the diaspora. That is where we have pilot projects in Ghana and Cameroon that we currently do. It's called VIDO and it's implemented by the GIZ currently. I think that all investors that do things medium and long term cannot work at the cost of nature and humans. And of course, with our instruments, we would like to contribute to make it more intensive. If we've got more possibilities, we will do more, but we do a lot already. Thank you. Thank you very much. Once more here, the hint, the live room is open. If you'd like to join the live stream, you can ask your question underneath the chat. And there is one critical question that I would like to ask from the chat, which is towards Mr. Oswald and Mrs. Müller. With the presentation of some of the success stories from Tanzania and Ghana and the declarations by GIZ, it's not enough. It is the fragmented and destroyed private national sector in the context of unequal competition. What does development cooperation do in order to solve the problems of this sector? Access to joint ventures and funding sources, and what are the associations that support this?
Mrs. Müller, would you like to start? Yes, please. This is an important field of our activities. It is part of the Marshall Plan to support the African mid-sized companies, and access to financing is always an issue. There are programs in cooperation with the Organization for Reconstruction. We are always busy in fields like capacity building and so on, but this is definitely an important point. We are cooperating intensely with economy organizations. We have good experience in Germany with these organizations. We have a strong small and mid-sized entrepreneurial group, and there are always economical organizations which can support the cooperation with Africa. And there are programs which bring together German economy organizations with African economy organizations and associations. So we try structurally to do something, because of course small fragmented small companies find it a difficult world in a globalized market. The African free trade zone, once it will establish step by step, will help definitely. But I think this needs to be prepared, and the companies need to be prepared and empowered to enable them to benefit from Europe, from foreign direct investment, without being rolled over and smashed by this. This need not happen, and it does not happen in the fields where we work. But of course, it is not an automatic thing. You need to do something. You need to support the companies. The organizations of the companies need support. And I think this is on the agenda of the development cooperation.
Vielen Dank. Herr Oswald, möchten Sie noch ergänzen?
Thank you very much. Some additional remark, Mr. Oswald? Yes, sure. This is one of the core elements of Compact with Africa, which the G20 identified, and where the start of a new development can be only part of in the reform program of our African partners. And therefore, the core of this Compact with Africa was to present their own reform agendas, to validate them, and in countries like Ghana, Tunisia, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, between 7 reform partnerships are supported by us in detail. And it is an important element that the negotiation capacity is increased. Let me remind you of the G7 initiative CONNEX, which of course supported negotiations implemented by GIZ, which supported and improved negotiation capacity in the field of raw material. And I mentioned Africa Go. In Africa, there's a green credit line running where companies who would like to be active in renewable energies can be equipped with finances at attractive conditions. So this is very important. It is central. What is important is also vocational training, which is a central core of the special initiative, professional training and job creation. I think what we need to have in mind always is to set up the overall context and simultaneously supporting our partners to enable them in their local markets to be resilient against ruinous measures of third parties, which might push them out of the market, or that they are pushed out of the market by unfair marketing measures. I think we are on a good way here. And I think it is clear that together with the African Free Trade Zone, and I'm very happy that an African woman is the head of the WTO at the moment. And what's required is always protection measures. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
Big Blue Button Room, aber leider ist der Herr
We had Mr. Rieger in the Big Blue Button Room. Unfortunately, he is no longer in this area. Please come in again, Mr. Rieger, to ask your question. Allow me a question, meanwhile, to Mrs. Kanza. You mentioned that the investment agenda needs to be expanded, that we need to diversify. How exactly do we get there? What are the required measures? And a question to Mr. Odiambo and Mrs. Honu. Both of you mentioned that it is necessary to better bring together local and international investors. Do you have concrete proposals how to do this?
Who goes first?
Entschuldigung, ja, bitte, Frau Kanza, fangen Sie an.
In terms of expanding the investment agenda is one, just building on the recognition of which sectors are attracting the most investment and what the impact of that is on employment, on including youth and women, for instance. And recognizing that and saying, you know, we still need our natural resources. That's still a strong source of revenue. At the same time, how do we address constraints to investment in other sectors like tourism, like agriculture, which involve a lot more local SMEs. Women are still the predominant producers in agriculture, for example. What can we do about post-harvest losses? How can we enable cottage industries in just what we call in post-production, sort of pre-market packaging, for instance. So that needs a much more intentional and different approach. Also, in terms of financing instruments, it means you need to look much more at what's possible at the retail level, and the digital economy is really expanding the possibilities, and not just focusing on large instruments, much more formalized, dependent on commercial banks, instead of looking at what can be done with mobile money solutions. Fintech is really making inroads on what the possibilities are in that space. So that's just one example. The other that is emerging and growing in intensity is regional value chains as well. So not just supporting global supply chains, but how do we facilitate and improve trade facilitation that enables, again, local SMEs to be able to trade more with their neighbors in Africa. You may be aware that intra-Africa trade is the lowest, or in terms of intercontinental trade compared to any other continent around the world. Clearly, there are reasons for this. One is the infrastructure, so connectivity within the continent. There's efforts underway to talk about how to improve shipping, because shipping around the continent, because you have to lower the costs of moving goods and services, connecting the backbone for payments across the continent with so many currencies, many of which are linked to the dollar. This all increase friction for interaction within the continent. I hope that gives you some idea of some possibilities.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, definitiv.
Thank you very much. Definitely, yes. These are some ideas. And the second question, first Mrs. Honu and then Mr. Odhiambo, please.
Okay. So now, if you come to the continent, I think we are organizing better. So what you'll find is there's been this proliferation of hubs. Hubs are coming up, and all these different ecosystems coming up to organize different groups. So if you look within agriculture, there are different agencies that are looking to form a database of sorts of organizations and what they are doing. Within my own space, which is the tech space, there are lots of hubs who are bringing together entrepreneurs and great businesses and supporting them across the country, and creating all these different networks. If you look within the fashion industry, within the transport, so now there are different industries organizing better and creating these databases of places you can go to. Another good example is actually today in my country, they are launching the Ghana Enterprise Agencies Act, which is an act to strengthen MSMEs, and a place to sort of match, MSMEs and attract investments for those types of businesses. If you look at agencies like GIPC, they are looking to connect, the dots between organizations that are doing great work and different investors. If you look at different development corporations, I would also like to commend the GIZ that's doing a lot of work in that space at supporting local businesses to be investment ready in terms of skills training, in terms of, mentorship and coaching and all the different initiatives that GIZ is doing. So I think now it's easier. If you go online and type businesses within a certain industry, I guarantee you a list will come up with either an agency, a corporation, a group that has created a database for you to be able to find these different organizations, or you will simply find great organizations that are now using their putting more of their businesses online. So you have a lot of businesses also understanding that they have to digitalize their content so that they can attract these types of investment. So now I think there are different pathways to find these great organizations. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Odhiambo, Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Odhiambo.
Ich teile auch die Meinung von Frau Honu erstmal, dass
thank you very much. I fully agree with Mrs. Onu. We need more visibility on the one side for startups on the African continent. And at the same time, I'd like to underline that, and this is my personal experience, that in the world of startups, we are very often running the risk that young entrepreneurs are kept small. What do I mean? Supporting these companies by small amounts of 1,000 or 1,000 euros. This seems to be attractive at the beginning for a young team, a young company, which is dynamic and full of energy. But the potential to grow, to become a mid-sized company is not really promoted after the first 2 or 3 years when you are ready with the incubation or accelerator phase. And so on the one hand, I see a demand to further promote startups with big budgets, because only this way a team will have the opportunity to grow into a big company. And at the same time, there's a lot of competition. We see lots of young people or entrepreneurs who come to Africa, bring their equipment, and they have other opportunities to attract investment. And this again is a disadvantage for the local entrepreneurs. Therefore, I plead for the equality of chances when it comes to promoting local investment, and that we have this in mind and take this into account when it comes to demanding investment. On the other hand, I think that strengthening the existing organizations in Germany as well as in African companies is necessary. And what I have in mind is the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce, what was the first go-to station for me as a young company, where I asked about investment in Germany. But at the same time, when the point was, how can I bring my investment to an African country? And I think there's an opportunity to bring together the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce and the African chambers, so that young companies can contact these chambers of industry and commerce in their own country. Because what I see very often is that people want to go from Germany with their investment to Africa, and this would be an opportunity to make the support for small and medium-sized companies in Africa more visible, and to support this by investment volume. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we have 2 questions. One asked by Mr. von Holtz, followed by a question by Mr. Weikowait. Thank you very much, Mrs. Odhiambo. I'd be interested to hear. We are speaking a lot about the Agenda 2030, sustainability agenda. I mentioned it in my opening work, but there's also Agenda 2063, which came into being in 2015, African Agenda on Socioeconomic Tradition, and the African Free Trade Area is an issue here, and the planning and division of a Pan-African digital network is a point. I wonder, or I'd like to hear from our guests from Africa, how far this agenda is of any importance for people who take decisions in government offices in Tanzania and Ghana, or in the scientific world. How's your experience? Universities, do they talk about this? Is this agenda of any importance? Do you see potential levers here to, how shall I put it, to pass the way, I can't tell it in German at the moment, for growth of the market in Africa?
Vielen Dank. Dann direkt noch die Frage
Thank you very
von
much.
Weikowait.
Then directly, Mr. Weikowait's question, please.
Herr Weikowait, können Sie uns hören?
Mr. Weikowait, can you hear us?
Okay, ich glaube, es gibt leider
Well,
Probleme
I
bei der
think there are some
Zuhörung. Das
issues
tut mir sehr, sehr leid.
here.
Vielleicht können
I'm
wir
sorry.
Nachhinein
Maybe
der Veranstaltung
we can
Ihre Frage noch aufnehmen. Dann würde ich
take up
jetzt
your
zunächst das Wort
question
wieder an
after
Frau
this
Kanser
event.
überreichen.
I'd like to hand
Dann
over
Frau Honu und Herrn
the
Ottmar
mic
bitten,
to
die
Ms.
Frage von
Kansa
Herrn von
and
Holtz zu
ask
beantworten und dann gleichzeitig
Ms.
noch einmal
Honu
Herrn
and
Oswald
Mr.
und Frau Müller
Odiambo
bitten,
to
vielleicht
answer
noch
Mr. Holt's
ganz
question
kurz,
and
falls Sie noch
ask
etwas zu sagen haben,
Ms.
gerne noch
Müller
einmal
and Mr.
einen
Oswald
Abschlusssatz,
to,
bevor wir dann an
well,
Herrn von
wrap it
Holtz
up
überreichen
before we
zum
hand back
Schlusswort.
to Herr von Holtz for final remarks.
Thank you, Sabine. One, it was an excellent question, and thanks for bringing it up. In my experience, and we worked very closely with the African Union and ensuring that all key stakeholders were on board. The agendas are very much aligned, and the UN SDG 2030 is seen as a milestone towards achieving Agenda 2063. When it comes to continental programs, there are ongoing efforts that we at the forum were involved in. So, for example, I mentioned Grow Africa and the food security agenda, which was very much aligned with the continental what they call CADEP, Continental Africa Agriculture Development Program, which as part of its milestones was helping countries develop investment blueprints. And our role became to rally the global community around this regional agenda and to help countries actually make progress. So those are stepping stones. Similarly, with the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, as well as there's a corridor initiative related to trade facilitation. We've also seen collaboration in the area of related to environmental management. So, for example, the Africa Circular Economy Alliance. So constantly you see this alignment between initiatives or interventions to achieve the SDGs, but with a much longer term view in terms of continental programs to ensure that all countries are aligned. Obviously, some will move faster than others. Key, though, which I felt was an element in the question, was locally, what is the buy-in for these regional processes? And I'd say in that regard, the results are mixed by and large. To the extent that local communities experience the actual impact of these continental initiatives, then the buy-in is much more limited and they're seen much more as a political exercise. This is currently a concern with the AfCFTA, which is to say we need to ensure that local businesses see the value of a single market across the continent, and which is not the case. You still hear complaints, for example, about access to visas and challenges in doing business across the continent. So this is it's going to be a continuous balancing act for local communities to believe in these continental programs and to vote in their parliaments that their countries participate in these processes.
Ja, vielen Dank. Dann Frau Honu bitte und verbunden mit der Bitte, sich kurz zu fassen, da Herr von Holtz sehr
Please, Mrs. Honu, and I would like to maybe shut it short because Mr. Holtz has to leave soon.
Okay. So I just wanted to follow up to like all the great insights that Ms. Kanza just shared. And I totally agree. I wanted to just add something to the last piece that she said about decentralizing the information for local businesses, not to see it as a political play or to understand the value that it gives to them. In part of the question, there was the question asks about universities, and I think, as a matter of fact, we should look at bringing the information down to everybody, including bodies of academic institutions, to discuss these different policies, these different initiatives, so that they break it down for young people and for businesses to really see this is where there is value. They have made access easy. They understand the policy to how it relates to their business and how they can use it to take their business forward. So I just wanted to say that we need to break down the information more and sort of get voices on the ground from businesses to feel part of, creating or co-creating the solution. So just getting insights, making sure that they understand, the value of these different policies, and making sure that they are able to take advantage of the opportunities, because currently that still remains the challenge, that these policies just seem to be something that happens at the macro level, that where governments and world leaders go and have these conversations, but to the common man on the ground or to the local business on the ground, they see it as far removed from them and the businesses that they do. Thank you.
Herr Odhiambo, möchten Sie noch etwas hinzufügen?
Mr. Odhiambo, would you like to add anything? Maybe 2-3 sentences. When it comes to agriculture, one of the targets of Agenda 2063 is that there had to be an intermediate step for 2025, which is quite a challenge. There are still 4 years to go to reach this goal or target. We need to make smallholder farmers' activities more efficient, but we are on the way, and I would like to remind you that 4 weeks ago, the Tanzanian president, Ms. Sanogo, lifted the trade barriers between Tanzania and the continent, and this brought about a return of normal transactions, of normal trade between these borders or across these borders. I think the Agenda 2063 lets us hope that we are going to have timely standardization of trade processes, that a product from Zambia can be aligned with a product from Kenya, and we did a lot or have done a lot of standardization here. And at the same time, we face the challenge to bring all those different countries under one umbrella. I am looking forward, and I believe that we have a chance to reach this agenda. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Odhiambo. Mr. Oswald, would you like to add something? Of course, Ms. Odhiambo. Mr. Holt's questions. We do realize Agenda 2063 does play a large role on the continent, and we do have this Marshall Plan with Africa, and this Agenda 2063 took this as a reference point in order to support African countries in implementing. We in Germany do this, and in Europe. You asked, Ms. Odhiambo, where can we improve? Of course, this is towards Europe, that we use the Cotonou process in order to harmonize all those documents more, and the Team Europe approach brings about a better performance from Europe. That is what I wish for. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Müller. Please, to wrap up, if you so wish. Thank you very much. I could say I am very much confident, and the discussion showed, and the discussions and contributions from our guests from the African continent showed me that we are not that wrong, and we have to counter check all these things. On the other side, there is a huge dynamic despite COVID, and I am confident that we together will march forward.
Ja, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank all the panelists for this very interesting discussion, of course, at our partner GEIZ and Ottmar von Holtz for organizing this event. And I would like to hand over the mic to him. I am saying goodbye here, and I'm delighted to listen to what Mr. von Holtz takes off this event. Thank you for this chance, and after such a discussion, it's a challenge to find a fitting wrap up. Our today's discussion comes to an end now, but I'm sure that we need other formats for discussion, and I hope they will follow, whether organized by the German Africa Foundation. There will be other bodies, but I could also imagine that the German Africa Foundation will work here, because these are important topics that we talked about. I thank all participants in this event, including the audience and discussion. Thanks for the interpreting and the background workers, and Ms. Odiambo for moderation. And the largest thank goes to panelists Ms. Onu, Ms. Kanza, Mr. Odiambo, Mr. Oswald, Ms. Müller. Thank you for your input. And at the end, the recommendations for actions for the commissions. I think there were lots of good impulses here. Let me just mention a few. The youth was mentioned, something where we have to have a very close look, because youth offer chances. You have to base yourselves on youth, but they need free space in order to develop. The diaspora was mentioned. More in the connection of wiring money, and we could also discuss what is the role that the African diaspora plays in concepting programs. That is something that we should enlarge, because there's a lot of knowledge about the life on site in Africa. Higher education facilities were mentioned somehow, and I think there's a lot of potential left here to use. When we include African experts from higher education facilities in concepts, we do have higher education cooperation with West Africa. There's a lot of potential for cooperation. Women were mentioned, a very important aspect. And for future discussions, we would be important the role played by regional organizations. How far do they, or what role do they play that is underneath the level of African Union? And the topic, it's called leapfrogging in telecommunication area. That's what we can see in Africa. There is no landlines, but immediately they went to mobile, and this is great. I would wish to have this in the areas of transport, energy, that you do not make the mistakes that we made in Europe. There are lots of topics that are left out. Thank you very much for organization, to the German Africa Foundation, to all participants and the audience, and I wish you all a very wonderful and sunny evening.